Hello, welcome to North Suburban Library District's virtual tour of historical downtown Chicago. My name is Bill. I'm a librarian here at Chicago, and I'm happy to share with you today some of the things I know about downtown Chicago. I've guided hundreds of tours through the downtown, and I've done a lot of research into Chicago's architecture and history, and I'm happy to share with you today some of the things I've learned. We're going to start the tour today with talking about something we can't see when we visit downtown Chicago. The idea is that sometimes what we can't see is very important. We'll also see that problems and limitations can lead to innovation, and that small, insignificant things are connected to far larger, more important things. All we have to do is to learn to see the connections. After the Chicago fire of 1871, almost every building in downtown Chicago was destroyed. The city solution to this was to rebuild quickly, and instead of using wood and some stone to build their buildings, they decided to use stone and iron. The buildings then would be far more fireproof. In the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, Chicago's main central business district was its downtown. The limited transportation system of the day funneled hundreds of city workers into the central business district. That was the easy way to get workers to work. But downtown Chicago is confined by Lake Michigan, by the Chicago River, and by vast railroad yards to the west and to the south. So as businesses grew, they couldn't grow out, but they had to grow up. And that created a problem. The solution to that problem was that the buildings needed to be built on rafts. And the reason for this is that 10,000 years ago, a mile-high glacier that covered the Chicagoland area began to recede. And when the Ice Age was over, we had the Great Lakes, and there was also a thick layer of clay, wet, mushy clay that's about 30 to 40 to 50 to 60 to 70 feet below the surface soil of the city of Chicago. And as buildings grew taller, they also grew heavier. And this clay was a very poor material to be a foundation for these buildings. Here's an example of a building that that had a problem with the soft clay soil. It's the Monadnock building. It's built in 1891. It's 16 stories tall, and it was designed by Burnham and Root, Daniel Burnham and John Wellborn Root, and it's very heavy. If they didn't use a floating raft, if its foundations weren't supported on a floating raft of concrete and steel, the building would have sunk in a variety of places. But this floating raft is holding the building up. The floating raft principle is the same principle that a raft floats on water. It follows the Archimedean principle that to carry a weight, to float a weight on anything, you have to have an object that holds the same volume of weight that it's carrying. So the raft that the building is resting on covers a large area of soil and clay that's equal to the weight of the building that it's supporting. Here's another view of the Monadnock building, the entrance to it off of Jackson. Looks like a fortress building. The windows are set deep in its brick walls. Here's a view of the Monadnock looking up. It's a beautiful building. It's very spare, very unornamented, but it has its own beauty. But it's reached the limit for a wall-supported building. The problem is, as you build higher and higher, you crowd out office space, which was the very idea of building the building taller. Here's an example the little surprise. If you step into the lobby of the Monadnock building, it's quite a beautiful, interesting lobby. It's been renovated and cleaned up, and it is the same condition, the same way it was when the building was built in 1891. So it's like walking through a time capsule. You get to walk through a little bit of the year 1891. Here's another building that's resting on a floating raft. Today, it's the home of Roosevelt University, and it was when it was first built, it was known as Auditorium Building, Auditorium Hotel, built in 1889 by the architectural firm of Dankmar Adler and Louis Sullivan. It's also a wall-supported building. You can see the windows are small, and there's heavy stone arches and walls, especially at the base, to support the building. Here's a side view of the building, and we can see the archways and the stone. So here the wall is holding the building up, and the windows are very, very small. Another example of a heavy, beautiful stone building, wall supported, is the Rookery Building. It was built and designed by Burnham and Root in 1888. It's 12 stories high, and it's also wall supported, except for a small portion at the southeastern rear of the building, which is just the beginnings of a steel skeletal support system. Um, Here we see one of the exterior columns that's helping to hold up the building. It's marble and stone. It's quite beautiful. Here's another view looking up of the Rookery Building, and we can see the brickwork and the fine detail, beautiful work, all designed by John Root. Here's the stone entranceway to the Rookery Building. It's also, once again, very beautiful. The name Rookery Building actually comes from a building that was on its site before it was built. Uh, One of our city halls in the city was on this site before the Rookery was built, and in 19th century slang, to rook somebody was to cheat, snooker, or bamboozle them. And even though the city hall on the site was torn down to make way for this building, when this building was put up, people nicknamed it the Rookery Building because it still reminded them of the city hall that was on the site previously. If we step into the building, we see a beautiful lobby. The lobby was renovated in 1935 by Frank Lloyd Wright, and he covered much of the interior of the lobby in beautiful white and gold marble. So it has a beautiful, clean, airy look. Here's a staircase leading up into the building. The lobby really not right now is about as far as the public can go, unless you have an appointment with a tenant. But they hold weddings in here at the base and other events. We're looking up. We see the roof, the ceiling of the lobby. It's got beautiful glass and steel girders there. It's kind of inspired by Parisian railway station. Another view of the ceiling. It's unexpected beauty. It's a bit of the 19th century that's still preserved. Another view of the lobby. And here, many people walk by and just assume that this section here is being worked on or repaired, or that for some reason the part of it is missing. Well, actually, it's intentional. Frank Lloyd Wright had great respect for John Root and his designs, and Frank Lloyd Wright left a small hidden panel of his renovation off so the public could see the beautiful work, the steel work of John Root. It's small surprises like this that you can find in downtown Chicago, and they're always kind of fun to see. We're back to the Monadnock building, and I just want to stress further that uh, as the city grew and demanded that buildings grow taller and taller, uh, architects reached an impasse with the wall-supported building. As the buildings grew taller, they needed a wider and bigger base to hold up the building, And because of the lack of space in downtown Chicago, that was unfeasible, but it was impossible. And with all the office space that was eaten up, the wall-supported buildings um, really were not the solution to Chicago's business needs. In fact, pyramids are the perfect example of when you build so high, everything has to support the structure. All the walls and the interior stone need to support the structure. So this wouldn't the pyramids don't make a very good office building. Um, so the problem of tall wall supported buildings that they were too heavy, took up too much space on the ground, offered less and less office space, and could only go so high. Another solution was needed, and that's the skyscraper. A skyscraper is not just a tall building, it has a special design. A skyscraper, simplistically speaking, is a tall building whose walls support none of its weight. The building is supported instead by an interior structure of iron and steel. This makes the skyscraper much lighter, with more room for office space, and as yet has found no limits to its height. This lightness and minimum land footprint, and its ability to grow higher and higher, makes the skyscraper a new species of building. Where did the inspiration for the skyscraper come from? Well, ideas about shorter, smaller buildings had used wood skeletons before, and smaller structures had even used iron skeletons before, but people did not dare to build a tall building with a steel or iron skeleton. But the inspiration for a skyscraper nevertheless exists. Here's a shot of the elevated train line that's running down Lake Street. It carries a horizontal load, uses iron and steel, and the elevated train system was built in the 1890s. And so this structure has been around for more than almost 130 years. That load-bearing horizontal and you turn it vertical. Gustav Eiffel built the Eiffel Tower. That was built in, excuse me, that was built between 1887 and 1889, and it showed that iron and steel were all you needed to build a tall vertical tower. This is not considered a skyscraper. People don't live there. People don't work in there. There's no office space. But it is a beautiful tower, and it does have the same idea as what the interior of a skyscraper does. Strangely enough, or coincidentally enough, Gustav Eiffel and the creator of the world's first skyscraper were classmates at the same Parisian School of Architecture and Engineering. William LaBerengeni built the world's first skyscraper in Chicago in 1885. Initially, it was um, 10 stories tall. 2 stories were later added. So this shows you how limitations, problems with soft, wet soil, and with the need, with the business district being having its limitations. These limitations forced the innovation of the skyscraper, and this building stood on this location from 1885 until I believe 1930, when it was torn down and another building was put up in its place. That's always been a problem for preservationists in the city of Chicago is uh, the city has needed to tear down smaller buildings to build larger and taller buildings. So even the skyscrapers of the late 19th century and early 20th century were not tall enough to meet the demands and needs of the city. Another building built in 1895 uses the same idea of the steel cage or iron skeleton to hold the building up. It's the Marquette building designed by Holabert and Roach, and that, like I say, was 1895. And its walls hold up none of the building. The walls are made of terracotta, which is baked clay, and windows. We can see the windows are getting larger. Anytime you see a building with larger windows, you know that it's supported by an interior structure if it's a tall building. If it's a tall building has very small windows, then you know it's mostly or all wall supported. Here's another view of the Marquette building. Looking up, again, we see the windows are wider and larger. This helps the office workers inside. And this is what we call the part of the Chicago School of Architecture, which is to show in the exterior of the building the exact engineering solution of the skyscraper, which is to show vertical support, vertical and horizontal supporting beams. And so they're very proud of their innovation and they're happy to show them in the exterior of the building. Another detail of the Marquette building is this baked clay terracotta, which is relatively very light and easy to make and has no supporting ability. If we step into the Marquette building, once again we're stepping into the 19th century. This is a beautiful Carrara marble stairwell. It's it's a very beautiful lobby, and around it has a rotunda. Rotunda has a beautiful mosaic that tells the story of one of the first European explorers to the region, Marquette and Joliet. Father Pierre Marquette and Louis Joliet came to the Chicago area in 1673. Um, if not, they weren't the first explorers the first European explorers to come into the area. They were first Europeans to be guided by the Native Americans who showed them a route as they were coming back from the Mississippi, showing them a route up the Mississippi River to the Illinois River to the Des Plaines River, where they carried or portaged their canoes to a small, sleepy little south branch of the Chicago River, and from there they canoed into Lake Michigan. Marquette instantly realized he had just found a water route between the Great Lakes and the Gulf of Mexico. The French never capitalized on that, but the Americans did. Here we have a view of the Chicago building. It was designed by, pardon me, it was designed by Holabird and Roche, uh, built between 1904 and 1905. Also, the Chicago School. We can see that the windows are increasing in space of the walls. This also is really an example of something that caused the Chicago downtown area to revitalize itself. In the 1970s and early 80s, downtown Chicago fell on hard economic times. And this building here is one of the reasons why downtown Chicago rebounded and was revitalized. Today, it's a dormitory for one of the universities that is in downtown Chicago. So the idea of hotels, university dormitories, and residential buildings, um, they've brought people back into the downtown area on a permanent basis. And so restaurants and nightclubs and bars and other businesses can be opened later, and there's plenty of people that keep downtown much safer than it used to be. Another skyscraper. This is the Sullivan Center, designed by Louis Sullivan, formerly the home of Carson Perry Scott and Company. Louis Sullivan here emphasized the horizontal nature of his building. The walls are made of white terracotta baked clay, and the windows we see are larger and larger. It allows natural light to come in and show off the articles and things that Carson Perry Scott is showing, and it makes the shopping experience much more enjoyable. Another detail of the Sullivan Center. This is all Louis Sullivan's beautiful detail work. Um, this building was built in 1899 and then expanded in 1904, 1906, and 1961. Here's the entrance to the Sullivan Building. This is beautiful steel and iron work designed by Sullivan. The detail runs to the length. There's a level of this iron on both sides of the building with tremendous beautiful detail, and it adds a lot to the beauty of the building. Another closer shot of the detail. These are some of the things, if you take your time, you can really enjoy downtown Chicago, seeing kind of like the evolution of the tall building. Now, here's a little unknown fact. The oldest skyscraper is in the world is in Chicago, and that's the Manhattan Building, the rightmost building, and it was designed, fittingly enough, by William LeBaron Jenney. It was started in 1889, finished in 1891. It's on South Dearborn, and it is an apartment building. It shares the block with other 19th century buildings. The building just to the left of it is the Plymouth Building, and the building to the left of that is the Old Colony Building. William LeBaron Jenney's skyscraper here is 16 stories tall, which for a while was the limit, the legal limit that buildings could grow to. Here's the detail of the Manhattan Building. It's a handsome building, and as I say, people have condos and apartments here, and that adds a lot of life to the downtown area. One more small look at the Manhattan Building. We see at the base of the building, there's a heavy steel beam that runs the length of at the top of the first floor. This is William LeBaron Jenney saying to the world, this is what's holding up my building: steel, not stone, uh, not brick, but steel. And it's his way of just a little small hint to the world that a new way to build a building is right in front of them. Now, we've talked before about the floating foundation, and we've talked about the evolution of the tall building. These are two separate parts of the whole. It's important to remember that the parts of the building above the ground evolved, and the parts below the building evolved too. Sometimes these evolved at separate rates and separately, but each part influenced the other. As the buildings needed to go higher, the foundations, the part of the building below the ground, had to become stronger and supporting more and more weight. Even though the world's first skyscraper, the home insurance building, was only 1/3 the weight of what a masonry or a wall supported building was, and it did not need a raft for its weight. Still, as buildings grew taller and taller, foundations had to change also. And as a new successful kind of foundation evolved, that allowed the architects to dream more and to engineers to build higher. So these two things went hand in hand. And lastly, it's important to remember that the invention of the elevator also was necessary, and the elevator safety brake were necessary to build buildings really taller than 6 or 7 stories. Um, Here's another small secret. There's a leaning skyscraper in the city of Chicago. It's the Fisher Building. It stands on the corner of Van Buren Street and Dearborn. And the Fisher Building was built in 1896. It leans about 6 to 8 inches to the north, and that was recognized several years after. Here's a photograph of the building looking straight up. I could not find a non-copyrighted photo that showed the lean in the building. You can, if you're standing in front of it across the street, you can definitely see the lean. But photographs, it's hard to see the fact that that building near the top is leaning to the left, to the north. This is what the building looked like when it was first built. A beautiful building, and so the owners had to come up with a solution to another problem, and their solution was to build the second building next to it. So this building um, was built in 1907, and its steel skeleton is connected to the steel skeleton of the Fisher Building. So it's stabilizing the Fisher Building, and both buildings are perfectly stable. The Fisher Building also is an apartment building, which adds more people to the downtown area and brings more life. The new building, or the relatively new building, which was built in 1907, its address is 337 South Dearborn. Now, when we visit Chicago, we tend to look straight ahead, maybe look down. But if we look up, we'll see, well, pyramids, not these pyramids, the other pyramids. Here's a pyramid on top of the Chicago Board of Trade, which was built in 1930. The building itself was 44 stories tall, and it's a definite pyramid. Resting on top of it is a 31-foot aluminum statue of Ceres, the goddess of grain. The reason there's a statue of Ceres is that the Board of Trade is the home of the world's first futures exchange. The world's first futures exchange started by the Chicago River in 1848, and it was a new way to speculate and to hedge against volatile prices of corn, wheat, and soybeans. It was a way for farmers and other investors to protect their investment in the price of those grains. And then over the years, the same concepts were added to stock prices and bond prices and currency prices. So that little story of the Ceres statue is hints at a far, far larger story. Is what is today the Metropolitan Tower. Um, it was excuse me, built in 1924. Architects were Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White, and it's a step pyramid, officially called a ziggurat, and it's a definite pyramid. It's beautiful to see. On top of it is a beehive. They call it the beehive. It shines a beautiful ultraviolet light at night. Here's the Century Tower. It's on the corner of Randolph and it's on the corner of Randolph and Wall Street, and it's also a step pyramid. It's also residences, I believe. Lastly, here's the Pittsfield Building. Um, it's on the corner of Dearborn and Wabash. So there are pyramids on some of Chicago's buildings built in the years of the 1920s and the early 30s. And the reason for this is that in 1924, the Egyptologist Howard Carter discovers the tomb of Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, and it begins a worldwide fascination for all things Egyptian. Pyramids, in particular, uh, seemed to be full of mystery. Nobody knew exactly what was inside them. A lot of speculation about hidden powers or magic. At any rate, architects wanted to add to their buildings beauty and mystery and something for the public to want to either visit or to rent offices in, to be associated with. There are more secrets in the city. If we go to the Chicago Cultural Center, which fittingly enough for this talk is was once the was what was once the Chicago Public Library's main branch. The Cultural Center today is a home for music concerts, art exhibit art exhibitions, lectures, weddings. There's a cafe at the bottom, place to read, to relax. It's a refuge again from the busy city life. And this is if you enter the building at its Michigan and Randolph entrance, you'll go up to the second floor. You'll stand underneath this beautiful dome. The building itself was finished in 1897 and rests on hundreds and hundreds of pilings that were pounded down into the clay, down into the hard pan below the clay. If we continue through the library, or pardon me, through the cultural center, going south, we'll come to a beautiful Tiffany dome. It's 38 feet in diameter and it's considered the largest glass Tiffany dome in the world. Chicagoans have a tendency to brag about having the largest, the first, and so this is just another uh, largest thing we can brag in Chicago about. Another look at it, it's got beautiful detail, and it's people have weddings in there and parties, and there's marble covering the walls, and here's another shot of it. It's one of the more beautiful things in downtown Chicago. And just another reminder, don't be afraid to step inside and see what's going on inside these buildings. If we do that, follow my advice, and we step into Macys today at its Washington entrance. It used to be Marshall Fields, but today it's Macys. And we walk into the Washington entrance and we look up, we'll see this beautiful mosaic ceiling. It's approximately 1,600 feet in area, 1,600 square feet in area, and it's composed of 1.6 million pieces of Favre glass mosaic tiles. The colors are super vivid and it's quite beautiful. This is viewing it from the ground floor, but you can go up to higher levels and see this mosaic ceiling a lot more closely. I took this photograph during the Christmas holidays. Another lobby is in the U.S. Bank building on the corner of LaSalle and Adams, and it was built. This is the U.S. Bank building, 190 South LaSalle, designed by Philip Johnson. And I just wanted to show you a few photographs of this beautiful lobby. That's gold leaf, gold foil on the ceiling, and it runs through the entire lobby. Those are marble floors and marble pillars. The pillars are purely decorative. Here's another shot of it by the elevators. Public is free to come into the lobby. You can't go up to the elevators unless you have an appointment. It's also the home of quite a few legal offices. Here's this pillar here is decorative, but it's very, very similar to some of the pillars we saw earlier that are on the exterior of the Rookery building. The Rookery building is just kitty corner to this building, and the architect wanted to pay homage to the Rookery building by doing that, by adding those columns inside his lobby. Now, if we walk toward the Board of Trade to the corner of LaSalle and Jackson, we could walk by this plaque, and most people walk by it and never read it, but it's kind of an interesting plaque. It commemorates a special event. Some may, in a way, it's commemorating the beginning of time. I know that's probably bragging a little bit too much, but excuse me, in the 18 uh, 80 in 1880s, a hotel stood on the site, the Grand Pacific Hotel. And in those days, as the railways spread across the country, they had a problem with time. Every town was on local time. Every town used the sun for their to set their clocks. So as the trains branched out across the country with their train schedules, there's always a confusion about what time the train was arriving, what time was departing, whose time was it using, and this led to problems with passengers, led to problems with offloading and unloading freight. So in 1883, the executives from the main railways in the U.S. met at the Grand Pacific Hotel, and they used an idea that a Canadian gentleman had come up with, which was to institute four standardized time zones in the U.S. Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific time, and up to today we still use those time zones, so that we all can set our clocks by, and so people have an idea of what time it is. This became a popular idea, solely took hold not just for railway time, but also for people's for other things too, for people's daily lives. And in 1918, Congress passed a law adopting the standardized time zones. Today, of course, they're worldwide. There's 24 time zones around the world, and this all came from a gentleman idea in Canada, popularized a little bit by the U.S. railways, and that's how ideas get started. Something else, if a person were to stop facing this plaque, but to turn around at the Board of Trade, at the base of the Board of Trade, you would see these two statues. The statue on the left is called Industry. The statue on the right is Agriculture. And they're actually relics, artifacts from a building that stood on the same site as the Board of Trade does now. An older Board of Trade building was built in 1889, and it wasn't meeting the needs as the decades rolled by. In 1929, that Board of Trade was demolished. And strangely enough, sometime after midnight, somebody took these two statues from the entranceway to the Board of Trade and took them to their estate and one of the traders. And these statues stood and lay on that trader's estate for decades and decades until that estate traded hands. And these statues were found laying down in the muck and dirt covered in vegetation. They were cleaned off. People did some research and they discovered they were from that older Board of Trade building. The Board of Trade reacquired them, put them in this plaza. So today we have something left from an older building. So salvage is very important. It helps us save things that are easily and quickly forgotten. Another interesting thing that people often walk by, they walk by this alleyway at 22 East 22 East Jackson, and it looks like a coffee shop in a small building. If we look back, we see, oh yes, it is a small building. It's only 3 stories. Well, that building is almost completely surrounded and buried by 3 other buildings that have grown up around it. That nobody really is sure how old that building is, that 3-story building is. It's been a Stables, a bar, a speakeasy. It's been a private residence, and now today it's a coffee shop. And through legal means, owners have kept this small alleyway, their access out to the world, open. So this little building that's almost buried is still able to be used by the public, and it's kind of a charming spot when you walk by it. I just wanted to point out to you this is the Fine Arts Building, and it was built between 1884 and 1885 by Solon Spencer Beeman, and two stories were added in 1898. It initially was a showroom for the Studebaker carriages, which evolved into Studebaker automobiles. In 1917, it became a building devoted to all the arts, also to the suffragette movement and to literary magazines. There's bookstores in there. There's at the bottom is Artist Cafe. There used to be 2 movie theaters in there. Also, Frank Lloyd Wright had an office in this building, and also the author of The Wizard of Oz, Ella Frank Baum, had an office in this building, and he and his illustrator worked on The Wizard of Oz and its sequels over the years. He also worked and wrote his Wizard of Oz at his home as well. But as you walk by this building, it's got a history, and one of its little secrets is that The Wizard of Oz was partly written in this building. Here's the Harold Washington Library. It's on the corner of Dearborn and Congress Parkway at the edge of the downtown, and it was built in 1991 by Hammond, Beebe, and Babka. And it's postmodern. It's a postmodern building, and postmodern buildings use earlier designs in their construction, and they rework them. And this building actually uses details from 4 different Chicago buildings. It uses the archways of the Rookery, the stone base of the Rookery, and as well as the stone base of the Auditorium Theater. It uses the brickwork and the windows of the Monadnock. It uses the archway of the Auditorium Theater, and it uses the mosaic tile details of the Marquette Building. So this is the Harold Washington Library, named after Chicago's first African American mayor, and it's Chicago's main branch of the library. On the ninth floor is what we call the Winter Garden. It's a refuge, a great place to sit, relax. It also has those railway style ceiling. The lights look somewhat similar to the lights inside the Rookery Building. A great getaway. Why did Chicago become Chicago? For two reasons. Let's walk north along the Michigan Avenue Bridge. There's the Tribune Tower, and as we reach the other side, there's a bust, a statue of Chicago's first permanent resident, first permanent non-Native American resident. Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable was a Haitian African, and he lived in Chicago from the 1780s to 1800. He had the first permanent housing there. He had a trading post. Many French trappers came through the area, but nobody stayed. But Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable was Chicago's first resident, and he was the first one. And he, one person comes and another person comes, and that first person becomes a magnet for other people to come and to be brave to set up their housing and start businesses. The second reason why Chicago became Chicago is the Chicago River. This is a lithograph, an engraving of what Chicago looked like in 1820. Over here, we see the dwellings of Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable. He left in 1800, but John Kinsey bought his property. So that's John Kinsey's property there, formerly DuSable's. Across the river is Fort Dearborn, which was burned down but then rebuilt. And then here is our Chicago River, the main branch, North Branch, and then the South Branch. It's that South Branch that Father Pierre Marquette found it came very close to the Des Plaines River. Chicagoans decided to take advantage of that, and in 1848, the Illinois-Michigan Canal, which went from the Chicago South Branch, connected 96 miles away to the Illinois River, and then from there to the Mississippi River. This created a link between Chicago, the Mississippi River, and the Gulf Coast. Because of the Erie Canal, Great Lakes were connected from one to the other, and finally through the Erie Canal to the Atlantic Ocean. So Chicago's link in this great transportation route made it a significant, important city. As I said, this was finished in 1848. Ironically, the very first steam railroad engine pulled out of Chicago and went on a trial run in 1848. The engine was the Pioneer. It still exists. It's in the Chicago History Museum, and it's railways that replace the water route. But the idea that Chicago was a transport hub is what started people thinking that Chicago could be, and then eventually became a hub for the nation's railways, then for the nation's air travel, as well as the nation's highways. So it's this water route that brings people and businesses to the city of Chicago, and what makes this a great city. Today, the Inam Canal is not used by anybody. In some places, it's kept open like this, and see its quiet beauty, but it's quiet because nobody is using it. So where's the idea of the skyscraper taking us? Well, the Reliance Building was built in stages between 1890 and 1895. We see it's a beautiful building covered in terracotta and also in glass. Today it's a hotel. Tower, Gothic tower. It's beautiful. The Wrigley Building, inspired by a Spanish cathedral. And of course, we have many different architectural styles. We've got Greek temples and rocket ships and Art Deco. We have finely glass has covered the whole surface of a building. We see glass isn't supporting anything. This was finished in 2003. Ricardo Bofill, the architect, he adds a cornice to the top of his building because the building stands next to the Marquette building. And here we see the Marquette building reflected in the sides of the Citadel building. Also, at last, the the skyscraper led to the world's tallest building for more than 2 decades, once known as the Sears Tower, now the Willis Tower. It's 1,454 feet to the roof, and unfortunately for Chicagoans, its radio antennas is not counted to the building's height. Important to remember, the city's downtown buildings have stories behind them. They have a surface and they have hidden secrets. Sometimes the secrets are as interesting as what's on the surface. Chicago is also a museum, a living museum, that reveals its past if you know where to look and what you're looking at. Things are happening all around you. The buildings are not as static or relics from the past. They're part of a process that we're part of now. History is just the earlier part of the process. Very shortly, we'll be part of history. Lastly, Chicago's story is America's story. And what was happening there is just the concentration of what was happening everywhere else in the United States. Thank you for joining our tour to Chicago. I hope you have a very fine day.